Hi. In today's lesson we're going to think about what happens when I turn my computer on. And to find out what happens when I turn my computer on, we're going to talk about hardware and software today. So let's just recap and make sure we understand what hardware is. Okay, so hardware is the physical components of your computer. You can see and you can touch them. So we might say that a piece of hardware is a keyboard or a monitor, or we could go inside the box and we could talk about the CPU, the RAM, the secondary storage, and all those things we talked about in our first video. Okay, now one thing we haven't talked about yet is software. Now our computer system requires both hardware and software to work. The hardware is the thing, as we talked about, the CPU is the brain of the computer. It's what carries out, it's what does all that work. But how does it know what work to do? Okay, well, it's the software that provides it with the instructions of what to do. It's what tells it what to do. So we have to have software and hardware in our computer system, otherwise our computer hardware won't know what to do. So when we start to think about what happens when I turn my computer on, we need to think about the primary memory to start with. Now, in our first video, we learned that there were two types of primary memory. We talked about the RAM, and we said that stood for random access memory, and we said that was a form of temporary storage. And we talked about how the CPU uses this as a place to temporarily save things. It's a bit like a notebook, like you would use a notebook, where you can make notes about what you're learning. Okay, and that's just how the CPU uses the RAM. Okay, now we also said that part of our primary memory was also this thing called the ROM. And we didn't really talk about what the ROM is. Well, today we're going to understand the function of the ROM. What's it there for? Okay, so we're going to start by thinking about what does ROM stand for. Now, ROM stands for read-only memory. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that we can only read what's in here. Okay, so the RAM, we can write to the RAM, we can read from the RAM, we can change it, we can edit its contents. Okay, but this ROM, this read-only memory, we can't edit the contents of it. We can't change what's inside there. So all we can do is read it. Okay, now, the instructions that you find inside the ROM are placed there by our manufacturer, the person who manufactured our motherboard, because the ROM is normally built into the motherboard. Okay, now inside the ROM are some really, really important instructions, and it's those instructions that tell the computer what to do when you turn it on. Okay, so the computer needs to read the ROM to find out what it's supposed to do when you turn the computer on. Okay, now you can see this happening. Right, so what we're just about to talk about, you can see it happening, but you quite often can't see it happening when you turn your computer on straight away. So what I do recommend you do is when you go home, turn your computer on and then restart it, reboot it. Okay, so go to the restart, go to the shutdown menu and click restart, and quite often you'll be able to see what's happening. Okay, and that'll help you understand what we're talking about today. So inside the ROM is a sequence of instructions that tell the computer what to do when you turn it on. Okay, now those set of instructions are called the BIOS. Okay, and BIOS stands for Basic Input-Output System. And the BIOS is just a sequence of instructions that tell the computer to test the hardware components of your system. So if we think about the hardware components that make up your system, we can understand the kinds of things that the BIOS tests. So the most important thing that your CPU needs to work is it needs some RAM. So one of the first things that your BIOS tests is for the presence of RAM. Okay, and it also tests how much RAM there is. So it needs to make sure there's RAM there, and it finds out how much RAM it's got to work with. Okay, now the other thing that we need, as well as the temporary storage, is we need the permanent storage. So the other thing that your BIOS tests for is secondary storage drives. Okay, so it sends signals to secondary storage drives to say, what secondary storage drives have I got? What are you? So I've got a hard disk drive, I might have a CD drive, I might have a Blu-ray drive, and it's the BIOS that performs the tests to find out, to check for the presence of these drives. Okay. Your BIOS will also check, as the name suggests, for input and output devices. Okay, so is there a keyboard connected to the system? Is there a mouse connected to the system? Is there a monitor connected to the system? Okay, now what happens is the BIOS carries out these tests. Now, if for any reason your computer fails one of these tests, it will notify you. So you will find out that probably what happened is your computer won't boot. So you'll probably see a black screen, but it will beep at you. Okay, so if you fail one of these tests, your computer will beep at you, and what you need to do if that happens is you go on the World Wide Web and you can check, you can find out what those beeps mean. Okay, so sometimes if you get 3 beeps, that means there's a problem with your RAM. And if you've got 2 beeps, maybe that means that you're lacking a keyboard or something similar. Okay, so your BIOS will do these tests and then tell you if there's a problem. Okay, now assuming you pass all those tests, what happens next? Okay, well, the BIOS then hands over control to another really, really important piece of software. Okay, and it hands over control to the operating system. All right, so once you turn on your computer, the computer goes off to the ROM, finds these instructions, finds these sequence of tests to do, okay, and then the BIOS will then hand over control to your operating system. And in another video, we're going to talk about the functions of an operating system and the role the operating system plays in your computer system.